Developers have a need for speed to meet market demands, and application security needs to ensure that data and privacy constraints are met. Unfortunately, that can slow down delivery. So, is it even possible to deliver secure software quickly? Enter Secure Coding, brought to you by GuidePoint Security's Application Security Services. Secure coding is more than a process, it's a cultural shift, one that will make it possible for both developers and AppSec to build in security while applications are being developed. Visit our AppSec resource hub to learn more at securityweekly.com/guidepoint.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Simon Bennett about growing Zed Attack Proxy from a personal education project to his current home with the Software Security Project. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, one announcement. InfoSec World 2023 is just weeks away. Have you registered to join over 2,500 cybersecurity experts on September 25th through 27th in Lake Buena Vista, Florida? InfoSec World is your gateway to a world of knowledge and growth. Don't miss the chance to enhance your career, connect with industry leaders, and make an impact on the rapidly evolving landscape. Secure your seat using a code, it's a long code, ISW23-SEC Week 20. To save 20% off your registration. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSecWorld 2023, and I'm pretty sure you can find the code there too. John, last episode I started off with the news with a fun quote that was something like we are stopping all operations for the foreseeable future. I've got another fun quote that I'm not sure how triggering this is going to be for you. This issue has been corrected. Do you want to guess which news article I'm referring to with this one?
I'm looking through them and trying not to say the obvious one.
It is the obvious one. I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay. Does this have something to do with Storm?
Something to do with a storm. So Microsoft, this is a short version. A signing key appeared in a crash dump. That crash dump made its way from a prod environment to a debugging environment without any detectors detecting. There was a secret key in there. And then in APT, some threat actors got that off of an engineer's laptop. Now, it's really hard not to just like shake fist at the sky and shout, why, for a long time. I know, we can see if we can get John to do a good Wilhelm scream by the end of this segment. But there's so many things that on the one hand were set up the right way, but just went wrong. And one of the things from a race condition from apparently the tool that was there to to scour crash dumps for sensitive info so that they don't come in out of production environment, to lack of logs. Log retention policy wasn't long enough, so it wasn't sure. They didn't have full confirmation and evidence exactly how this crash dump got taken, as well as the key that it itself was a consumer signing key, and it was supposed to have a narrow scope. But the validation wasn't in place for this key from the other Microsoft libraries users that were doing this, and it's sort of hard to just go through this litany without just kind of sighing too much. So I don't know. What do you want to add to this, John? What are the lessons that we can take from here?
I'm going to back up a step and sort of give it a bit of intro since we sort of dove in. For folks who didn't hear, Microsoft released the Microsoft it's MSRC, right? They released the MSRC. They released the sort of the official technical what happened. This is back to the breach which got announced in early July. It's interesting from a few points of view. So if I think what the better takes I saw on it out there is if you look at how the attackers were in here and what they were doing, pretty impressive. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of buts ... in the multiple failures that occurred from the vendor missing things, but at the same time, you have to be damn good to like just get into place to be able to stumble over those butts. So I think that's you got to give credit for that, right? This is a nation state going after a large, well-funded company that unfortunately happens to trip over themselves every time they turn around. But it's I don't know. It's not just for me. It's not just a purely fish shaking thing. It's not surprising, which is, I mean, that's equally that. I'm not sure which is more damning about it. I mean, yes, they made a bunch of mistakes. That's not damning by itself. I don't want to say this overall thing is damning, but for me to say that, yeah, that I'm not surprised. That's unfortunate. But here we are, 2023. I think their write-up is too short. Some of the other ones Mike links to are, I think, way better. I like the Wiz one that sort of goes through the key takeaways and then has the takeaways from the key takeaways. So it's longer, but I think it asks the right questions. I'm going to go to it from my standard, which I'm going to use another article in here, point of view of, okay, we're AppSec people. How do we actually think about, how do we stop things like this from happening in the future? Oh, I don't know. Have your logs hang around long enough that you can actually, go back and do investigations. It's like the main reason you have logs. So have your logs hang around for a while. Well, you could say if you're going to do a write-up on it, maybe be a little more clear. I know lawyers, they were fairly clear, but there's a lot of questions a lot of people are asking, like, okay, how did they actually break in originally? Why was a security engineer having access to a debug system, which is pretty close to production? So isn't there supposed to be a bit of an error gap there? There's a lot of sort of gaps in it. But from any of us in our organization, just pick one and go, how can I improve upon that? Okay, maybe we weren't storing logs longer because we just purely didn't have storage place. Well, okay, let's go to the boss and say, hey, do we want to be, what can we do in the future here? So I think it's just take a dartboard, throw this up there and throw a dart and go, okay, how are we going to work on that one? And that's a way for any of us to improve upon what we have. So I'll try to put that sort of positive spin on it.
No, I like that approach. And part of this actually made me think of, we just talked with Simon, and his AppSec in 3 words ended with frustrating. And there was an aspect of frustration here too, because they had at least ostensibly a threat model that said it's possible that key material or secrets can be in a crash dump. We want to make sure that we scrub those out of there before it leaves prod, but their tool wasn't quite working well. So there was a race condition, as they say in the tool, could have been tested better. Or maybe there's a different way of saying we just want to pull stack frames. We don't even want to have the potential for memory and sensitive information to be in here. But maybe that doesn't help the debugging as much as it needs to. There was also that aspect of, that we documented that, this key was only intended for particular scope. People should have been doing validating, and there were assumptions about the validation, but maybe a security control shouldn't be resting on documentation. Maybe the security, there's a better part of the process here to help people. So I'm using that to sort of riff on sort of that aspect of what went wrong and how much were we relying on people, or maybe a bit of a lack of attention to fine details, and try to figure out what can we automate, what can we do better there to test and validate our threat models and poke at them in a much more, with more scrutiny is what I'm going for.
I think, again, I'm not trying to belittle either side, but one of the things I didn't get into with the Zeb discussion was the amount of work that those guys have done to allow new contributors to come along. And part of that being the amount of testing, automated testing that they have in place to sort of, it's something he's proud of and he brags about, of like, we have so many tests which are running each night to make sure that like stuff doesn't change as we add code. It'd be interesting to see how much of this is being being tested in an automated manner. It might be, but we all have room for improvement.
We all have room for improvement. And actually that's part of the reason I pulled in 2 other related articles related to secrets. There's one about Apache Superset and one from Grafana. And this was less about the vulnerabilities themselves and more about what we can learn from them in the sense of designs and architecture. So in the Grafana case, it was actually they had some legacy CI/CD systems that couldn't work with their centralized signing server. So they're like, well, we need to share the secret with these systems. And it just so happens those systems logged that key in clear text. So logging came back to bite them. And in the Apache superset article, it was basically a hard-coded secret key that's been there since at least October 2021. Researchers scanned over 1,200 deployments and found that over 70% of them were just using that default secret key. So here's a hard-coded key. So again, these are just logging in clear text, hard-coded key, not being able to call, having to support legacy systems, or saying having that lack of trust boundary that says when this key leaves one server, goes to another server, it's now infected that server. That server is now equally toxic and needs to have all the same controls that that we desire for a secret key. So I wanted to bring these together, sort of just examples and ways to learn and take back and threat model your own environments to say, how much of this are we doing similarly? And maybe we should stop before we have our own, we take security seriously type of blog post.
You know what I liked on the Grafana one was the first paragraph. On August 24th, the GPG private key and passphrase with ID, blah, blah, was unintentionally shared. And then you go back up and you look at the date on the blog post, and it's August 24th. Thank you, right? Sometime, and I get it, this is, Grafana is a company. Like, where I was going to go with this is sometimes has to go through legal and management. And if you're lucky, 2 weeks later, you say, we care about your security. But the faster, especially this type of thing, the faster you can get this out there and just say, hey, this happened. So thank you for that. Otherwise, I will refer our listeners back to what Mike was just talking.
Well, we'll move on. We've got another vuln or two I want to talk about. Then we got some other non-vuln related topics, John, but one near and dear to my heart, path traversal. This is an article about when URL parsers disagree, and this was in librsvg. So it was actually in some Rust code, and which I also like. And along that theme of, yes, we can have memory safety, but humans are clever and creative, and we can come up with different ways to create security bugs. And in this case, there's an X-include feature within XML that basically can take an href attribute, and the researchers played around with it and found that you can put some dot slashes in there to get to Etsy password as the classic example payload. So it was just really neat. It's a great write-up, great walkthrough, both their blog posts from the Canva engineering blog, as well as from the GNOME issue that wrote this up. And it was pointing out about, there's validation about, does this look like a path? There's canonicalization, meaning how do we resolve the dot slash, and oops, this was in a query string and we forgot about the query string aspect of this. So just some neat lessons there and about that security checks, and just a really fun way of, read through how other people find vulns and, adopt that approach. So I think I've exhausted the fun parts of that for me. I'm not sure if there's anything else that stood out for you.
All fun. No, I think the key sort of, beside the sort of John's, comments about why you do or do not just refactor for security, the going to, just because the second part of that, which we also talk about, is just because you're doing something in a secure language, like, memory safe language, let's not call it secure, sorry, like Rust, doesn't mean it's suddenly we're set, right? And then the question is, if you are going to, I keep trying to make these educational. If you are going to try to go through and rewrite something in a different language, preferably more memory safe language, how do you go and test not just that it's compatible and it does everything the first version did, but that you didn't introduce more of the bad things? And that's, unless you, I don't know how. I guess if you had a decent application which was using this library, then you could point Z at it, but you couldn't just point Z at the library itself. So you have to have the test harness or an application that actually can allow you to test it. So that's part of the problem with something like this. But
yeah, and then it also speaks to ambiguity of parsing. Parsing is always one of those dangerous areas, and I want to touch on that for a second. But you were talking about refactoring and rewriting into a memory safe language, and I think that's a great setup for one of the articles you grabbed, John.
It is. Thank you for recognizing that setup. Where did it go? Sudo. I think a few of us have heard of it, or maybe seen it on a T-shirt with around the words of "Make me a sandwich." is a little utility for Unix, which allows a user, if they are given the right group of permissions, to run a command with root access. And the fine folks over at the Memory Safety Organization, memorysafety.org, decided that they were going to rewrite it in Rust. So the first stable release of MemorySafe Sudo, aka sudo-rs, is out. And from my point of view, okay, that's interesting. We're not seeing too much of this, right? We're seeing some of this, and we talk about some of the larger orgs doing it for their kernels and sensitive areas. But we're not seeing, I mean, it takes time, right? So an open source project, like, again, like I think Imagine said, just going through and rewriting in a different language, like it's really tough to do. Sudo is pretty small, so it's a little bit easier, but still, it's a thing to do. I'm curious to see, I'm just recognizing some names. I'm curious to see if there was some way that we could test over time, over next, I don't know, 18, 24 months, are there less vulnerabilities in this new version than in the version that they rewrote from? Because Sudo in general is a pretty eyed code base, right? That's been around for, I'm guessing, 20 years. So it's got most of the issues sort of squeezed out of it by now, I think. So I would consider this almost more of a hobby. I don't know if they've got really good reasoning for doing so. I'm not aware of it. But it'd be interesting to see, okay, the last Sudo vulnerability, I think, was what, 2-3 years ago, just roughly. So
yeah, the Qualys researchers, right?
It'd be interesting to see how is this, not is it worthwhile, but is it noticeably better over time?
Well, and I think too, there's an angle here that also speaks to just the effort. So this work started in December 2022. So we're getting 9 months later or so. And they're just at the point where they're ready for a release good for single user systems. So they say they're still working on the milestones for enterprise features. So meaning there's still a bunch of chance for new vulnerabilities to creep in, since they're adding features. But if we just say sudo, that seems a pretty simple tool conceptually. But if it takes a year just to rewrite one tool like that into Rust with a small group, that possibly supports the idea that we're not going to be rewriting all this C and C++ code into Rust anytime soon.
As long as they do me one favor and add some functionality so that when I make a typo in Etsy sudoers, it doesn't lock me out of the damn system, that would be beautiful. Sudo, Mike, let's talk about next story.
Let's go. So one of the reasons I threw a quick comment in here, a quick article about BlastPass, which is the latest 0-day that's been exploited against iPhones. But the reason I wanted to throw that in there was along the idea of architectures, because we did talk about BlastDoor a year or so ago when it came out with iOS 14. And so in part of what this article also points out is that the lockdown mode defeats this, meaning that the combination of BlastDoor, which was sandboxing parsing and saying, image parsing, for example, video parsing, link parsing, these are all highly brittle, vulnerable areas. Let's put them in a code sandbox written in a memory-safe-ish language like Swift that doesn't have network access so that vulns are less impactful. Now, clearly there was a vulnerability here that BlastPass got, it impacted BlastDoor, but lockdown mode was that way to do an additional architecture design that says, let's actually disable some default functionality for users who want to opt into it, users who don't need that immediate image preview. Therefore, defeating this type of zero-click type of vulnerability. So for me, yes, please update, but there's still a win here in the sense, and I think in a sense of optimism, at least for me, in the sense of the forward progress of sandboxing, rewriting parsers, these types of iMessage and environments, and as well as the lockdown mode. So that was why I wanted to add real quick and then move on. Not sure if there's something there or if you want to nominate our next article.
I think the interesting part about this to me, kudos to Citizen Lab, was, if I remember right from another article I saw out there on this was the 13th O-Day in Apple software this year. So while we do talk about, and I consider Apple stuff to be pretty decent from a security point of view, they are getting a lot of attention from NSO and others. So stay patched. This was interesting. I mean, one of the earlier ones they had this year, I was running in the lockdown mode just because there was known vulnerability for a while, and I'm like, So I used it as an experiment to lock down my phone, and I did it for about 6 or 8 weeks. And it was a light bit of a pain in the butt, not too much. It didn't cause too many issues, but occasionally it did. I remember 1 or 2 times cursing, so that's not too bad. But yeah, it's so I think that's just it's none of us are perfect. I'm not trying to say we are. Let's see, who do we want to pick on next? This Ubuntu article that you found, Mike, I thought was interesting from. I know we have different thoughts on this or different areas that were found interesting. I thought it was interesting from a point of view of we often talk to people. We talk about how do we lab these things? How do we go and figure out is something, how do you actually set these things up to actually do research on them or do whatever else? And what was neat about this one is they just grabbed a copy of Ubuntu and started poking around that. So you dug a little bit deeper into it, but I thought that was a refreshingly easy way for people to get involved.
Yeah, and I think what stood out for me and my cat, who's suddenly very interested in this, is that the researchers were like, we want to look for some areas of code that seem to be brittle. What has been exploited a lot in the past. And what was really funny is that one of the areas they were looking at had been exploited so much within CTFs that the Google CTF was just like, this is now off limits. This is just so broken. It's too broken. No, don't exploit this anymore. Let's have some fun somewhere else. But then they did look into this NF tables code, which they said had been already audited quite a bit, and more throughout the last year or two. More than a dozen vulnerabilities were found in this, and lots of local privilege escalation exploits. And then so they audited it themselves and found yet another vuln. So my mind here at this point went to, we talked with Simon about pen testing and having humans looking at web apps, humans doing the testing. Here's an area of code that has been exploited in the past. Lots of people have been looking at it. But then some more people looked at it and they still found some vulns. And it's sort of, at what point do you stop investing in an audit of this particular area of code? Because the code base is a few million lines in the kernel. You got to go look at some other places. So is there scanning? Is there fuzzing? What are the ways of being able to test this more completely or gain some confidence that we can at least worry about this area less and go on to find another part of it? So it's sort of it's the rhetorical question mode that I'm in at the moment.
I think that's a good one, right? Because some of the comments that Wiz had going back to the Microsoft story was, okay, Microsoft has, closed the investigation. We're done. We found what we're going to find. But then the other side of that is like, okay, well, and this is a concrete example I'm giving, and I try to pick on Microsoft for once. This is a concrete example of what you're just talking about. It's like, okay, well, just because you scanned it, is that actually, have we found everything? Or like, what if we try a different scan or a different tool or run in a different configuration or different architecture or a different network? It's very difficult for us to say something is secure, right? It could be secure for a given use case or a given environment. But yeah, it's especially for some of these more complex things. So, yeah.
Indeed. And there's another article that we've been wanting to talk, I've been wanting at least to talk about WebAssembly quite some more. And actually, when we had Josh on, he's done some work with TypeScript and also with WebAssembly. But I think his comment at the time was, well, there's nothing going on with WebAssembly yet. It's still, there's still a lot of things about the design being worked out. And there's a State of WebAssembly 2023 report that you threw in here, which I'm glad you did because I forgot to include it myself, that talks about, it doesn't actually, it's predicated on what are developers looking for, how are they expecting to use it. It's not necessarily saying, where is it? Or why aren't people using it? But I thought it was just interesting just to look and see that, yes, there's WebAssembly out there. It's going to be solving some, or developers want to solve some issues with it or some problems with it, but we just haven't seen it a lot yet. And I'm just kind of curious how you interpreted that report.
It has the feel of this is technology which developers seem to be really excited about. Docker's coming to mind. There was similar like that before too, right? But just because the devs are excited about it doesn't mean it's getting traction yet in prod. just because it's such a different beast. That I think a lot of managers are going to go, wait, you want to do what? You want to take an application written one language, cross-compile it, and like have it in this sort of object form and run it with this different runtime, which we've never seen before, which was designed for browsers, but you want to run on a server? Or the other way around, say you want to take something which was designed for server and a browser. So I think it's just that's going to require a little more head scratching from some of the larger orgs out there. I thought the report was interesting. I think that's my New Year's resolution for 2024. So I've used that word 3 months ago, before committing. There was some interesting things in here. Like, let's see, where was it on this one? Artificial intelligence respondents. 30% of respondents say they're using WASM for AI. Okay, that's different. And then another one in here. There was languages used for WebAssembly applications. Primary language for 3% of applications is COBOL. Thought that was different. So I think this comes back to probably something we were talking about a few weeks ago. There was an article with not DoD, one of the government grant groups was had put out some funding to reverse engineer or recompile an application for performance or security reasons, right? It's like an old app, you don't want to rewrite it. And I think this is sort of an example of that. Like, would you, Mike, rather rewrite your COBOL app into something like Rust, or just recompile it over to WASM? So I think if I say it like that, that has a ton of very strong influence, I would imagine, for a management staff. But are they biting on it yet? Maybe that's that 3%. So I think there's something interesting here. It's been on our minds for a while. It'd be interesting to see as this sort of picks up over the next year or two, or how it sort of goes. Is there something else as people start looking more at LLMs generating their code? Do they care less about the language? So I think it's a bit of a fuzzy area. Sorry, but it's something to keep our eye on.
Something to keep an eye on. And I know like a lot of the like image filters, a lot of them actually rely on WASM. So there are some fun uses for it, but it was also interesting to see that the tooling and the developer experience was pretty much top of all of the reasons. There wasn't anything explicitly security in there, which I thought was interesting, other than maybe it's hidden a little bit in the security, the performance concerns. Just because there's some aspects of WASM that still need to make sure that the security sandboxing can work well and still be performant. But we'd love to actually, so this was a call for our listeners. Are you using WASM for anything, whether it's a fun side project or even in your organization?
One quick stat on there before we move on, just let my fingers do some searching on the article or the report. 18% of developers are attracted by sandbox security. Compared to 23 by faster loading times, 22 exploring new use cases, 20 sharing code. So it's about halfway down the bar chart, but still, it's the only time it's mentioned in the whole piece is that one thing. So
yeah,
not fun.
And I think honestly, security doesn't have. I'm of two minds of that in the sense that security shouldn't really be the top. Security just should be built in. You don't choose a language because of security or other tools. You have security within them. And I'm going to use that to talk about Rust once more real quick. They have a crates.io postmortem about a user that uploaded malware. And basically, this is yet another one of the package management areas. Like NPM has been dealing with this. PyPy has been dealing with this quite a bit. This feels like just one of those growing pains as they say, the future actions that they're taking. They're going to scan all the crate uploads, look for both typo squatting, as well as check the contents of the crates for malware, effectively. And I thought this was a growing pain. But then my second thought was, what Rust is an eight-year-old roughly project. So at what point is this, need to curate with security-wise, a package manager, a growing pain versus just the bar, you must be this high to enter. And maybe it feels a bit late to be doing this now, but I will also say, better late than never. This is a good direction.
Yeah, I think part of the problem, it's actually sort of similar to Zap, I'm guessing, in a way. Part of the problem going on at Rust, and this is a guess, I don't know for sure, is those guys are working on so much stuff right now, they literally didn't have hands to address some of this earlier. But that's a bit of an excuse, and that's my excuse, not their excuse. Yeah, Pippi's been around longer, and they're still dealing with this. I think, this is one of the things one of my topics for the year is sort of keep an eye on of like, how are these repos going to handle it? And I'm glad to see that write-up. It seems like we still need better longer-term solutions because this feels like a Band-Aid to me. Decent Band-Aid, but it's not the end-all solution, right? At some point, we're going to stop talking about this, or like we stopped talking about security and LASM. So we're not there yet. Yeah.
Not there yet. Yes, supply chain. We've been fortunate to not overuse supply chain term too much, but it's a buzzword that will not go away because that's the undercurrent, exactly what this article is about. We did talk to Simon about Zap and a little bit about there was the change from OWASP to the secure software project, so it has a new home, and part of that was motivated by investing in and fostering support for an open source project. So now actually they've doubled the amount of paid developers from 1 to 2 on this project, which I think is yes, exactly. It's a good trend. And I threw a pretty much random article about JQ that's actually was kind of similar in spirit, I think. JQ is just one of my favorite command line tools for basically dealing with JSON. Everything these days is in JSON, which I far prefer than XML. Let's not deal with XML anymore, despite the path traversal fun you can have with it. Fun stuff aside, JQ just noticed that after a 5-year hiatus, they're back with GitHub with new admins and new maintainers, and so it's just an example of like taken this tool kind of for granted, but even the tiny tools like this that do lots of powerful, helpful things still have support from the community and still need maintainers.
So first, with apologies to our listeners, is there a JQ equivalent for XML? Does that exist?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Now I got that out of the way for everyone's brain.
I think RM-RF is the command line version.
You know what? I think probably, what do you think? Like 5%, 10% of it, 5 or 10% of us use JQ to the power it actually has in the damn thing. It's a really great little utility. 99% of the time I'm using it, I'm just formatting a doc so I can read it.
I use about 3 commands and that's all I need,
So for a little JSON Swiss Army knife, I remember sometime in the last year or two, I was like updating, doing one of my update trends, or just like going through my box and making sure I homebrew and everything else all my packages are up to date. And I was trying to figure out what version of JQ I was running, and if it was the latest. I'm like, oh my God, it hasn't been updated for years, and there's no issues, and it runs just fine. So the point being, kudos to those guys for that. I'm curious to see. Wow, 367 issues. Okay, well, I guess people have a lot to talk about. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes for the next year. What are they going to do with it? Rewrite it in Rust? WASM? I don't know. But I think it'll be fun I'm going to add it to my list of things to sort of check back in on and go, okay, what did they do now they've come active again?
What did they do now? Well, one thing to check back in on for listeners, I threw one final article from Mozilla Foundation about privacy and cars. And partially, this was a little bit of self-interest since we talked about this with Eve Mailer back in episode 249 about identity in cars, which, because we're talking about identity, also touches on privacy. We had a little bit of a conversation there, and I linked to that past episode if you'd like to check that out. But otherwise, we're pretty much at the end of our time here, Mr. Kinsella. So any final comments on one of these articles or a call out for our listeners?
Talked about the WESP stuff. We covered the Sudo stuff. The privacy one is oh man, I saw another version of this last week, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do? How do we as individuals deal with this? I can Faraday cage my car if I'm not driving it. I have a friend who has pulled his OnStar module out of his car because he didn't want to be tracked. So you can do some of these things, right? You might break a warranty. You might make your car stop working, even if it's a Tesla or something that's, more cars now are getting auto updates. So you might break the auto update functionality and be vulnerable in other ways. What we'll probably come back to in the next week or so, I did mention it earlier, there's two politicians in the US. I don't know if you heard about this, Mike. They're starting to push through legislation. They're starting to work on legislation, not push it through yet, to require certification or licensing or some sort of regulation on the testing and product use of large LLMs. So, which hopefully that just made a few of you out there scream and yell at your computers. But so there's some things going on in regulating technology, but my point is some of the areas where we might want it like this doesn't seem to be happening for reasons. But that's something we'll probably keep track of over the next 6 or 10 months.
Keeping track of all that. Well, we got our spreadsheet is growing. That Excel with Python support is getting exercised. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone else, for listening to us and joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of certificates, check out Secrets by FM Attack. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.